The clinking of crystal glasses stopped abruptly as the billionaire's cruel laughter echoed across the dining room, mocking the trembling plus-size waitress on the floor. But the amusement died instantly when the city's most feared crime boss stood up, his voice chilling the room. "You're laughing at my queen." The Lumina Room was the crown jewel of Chicago's high society dining, a place where reservations were booked 6 months in advance, and a single bottle of wine cost more than most people's monthly rent. It was a world of sharp angles, sleek marble, and impossible perfection. And then there was Clara Jenkins. Clara was 26 years old, and she was, undeniably and unapologetically, fat. She carried her weight in soft, generous curves that defied the rigid, ultra-thin aesthetic the restaurant's management desperately tried to enforce. Her black polyester uniform, ordered 3 sizes larger than anyone else's on the floor, dug into her waist, while the fabric chafed uncomfortably against her thick thighs during her grueling 12-hour shifts. Clara knew she didn't belong in this world of superficial glamour, but she also knew that the exorbitant medical bills for her mother, Agnes, wouldn't pay themselves. The Lumina Room paid a premium, and Clara swallowed her pride daily to collect her paycheck. Her manager, Bradley Hayes, was a man whose entire personality revolved around his tailored suits and his misplaced sense of superiority. He despised Clara. To Bradley, her very presence was an insult to the Michelin star ambiance he had worked so hard to cultivate. He couldn't legally fire her for her weight, so instead, he relegated her to the shadows. Clara was the ghost of the restaurant, confined to the back of house, polishing silverware, folding heavy linen napkins, and running trays from the kitchen to the service stations, strictly out of sight of the wealthy elite. "Keep her in the back," Bradley would sneer to the head waitress, Jessica Foley, whenever Clara walked by. "If Table 4 sees her sweating through that uniform, they'll lose their appetite for the Wagyu." Jessica, a woman as sharp and unforgiving as broken glass, would merely laugh, her eyes raking over Clara's broad hips with undisguised disgust. Clara heard them. She always heard them. But she kept her head down, her jaw clenched, and her focus on the survival of her family. Tonight, however, the Lumina Room was operating under an entirely different frequency. The air was thick with a palpable, terrifying tension. The restaurant had been completely bought out for a private event by the Moretti family. In the criminal underworld of the Midwest, the name Moretti wasn't just spoken. It was whispered with a healthy dose of fear. The dining room was filled with men in dark, expensive suits, their eyes sharp and assessing, accompanied by women dripping in diamonds and designer silk. Due to a sudden bout of flu that had wiped out 3 of the main floor servers, Bradley had been forced to make a desperate choice. Sweating profusely, he had dragged Clara out of the kitchen. "Listen to me, you clumsy cow," he hissed, his fingers digging into her plump forearm. "You serve the champagne. You do not speak. You do not smile. You become invisible. If you embarrass me in front of Lorenzo Moretti's associates, I will ensure you never work in this city again. Do you understand?" Clara nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. She smoothed down her apron, picked up the heavy silver tray loaded with crystal flutes of vintage Dom Perignon, and stepped out onto the glittering main floor. The chandeliers cast fractured light across the room, illuminating the sheer opulence of the guests. For the first hour, Clara managed perfectly. She moved with a surprising, quiet grace, her soft footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. She avoided eye contact, blending into the background just as Bradley had demanded. But the cruelty of the world rarely allows for a quiet night. At a corner booth sat Vanessa DuPont, a minor socialite who clung to the fringes of the mafia's wealth. Vanessa was stunning, rail-thin, and deeply, inherently mean. She had been drinking heavily, her loud, grating laugh piercing the sophisticated murmur of the room. As Clara approached to clear the empty glasses from the adjacent table, Vanessa's eyes locked onto her. Clara saw the malicious spark in the woman's gaze, a fraction of a second too late. With a swift, calculated movement, Vanessa extended her stiletto-clad foot directly into Clara's path. Clara's heavy black work shoe caught the heel perfectly. Time seemed to slow down. Clara felt the sickening sensation of gravity taking over. She tried to correct her balance, her thick legs twisting awkwardly, but the weight of the silver tray threw her forward. With a deafening crash, Clara hit the marble floor. The sound of shattering crystal echoed through the suddenly silent dining room. Expensive champagne soaked into Clara's uniform, stinging her skin and plastering the dark fabric to her chest and stomach. Sharp fragments of glass sliced into her palms as she instinctively threw her hands down to brace her heavy fall. The pain was immediate and sharp, but it was nothing compared to the crushing, suffocating wave of humiliation that washed over her. For a split second, the room was dead silent. Then a high-pitched, mocking laugh broke the quiet. It was Vanessa. "Oh my God," Vanessa giggled, pointing a manicured finger at Clara, who was struggling to push herself up from the puddle of champagne and blood. "Did the floor just cave in? I think she just caused a localized earthquake." A ripple of cruel laughter spread through the immediate tables. Clara's cheeks burned with a fiery, humiliating red. She kept her eyes glued to the floor, her vision blurring with hot, unshed tears. She scrambled to pick up the broken glass, her hands shaking so violently she cut her thumb on a jagged stem. Before she could even get to her knees, a shadow fell over her. Bradley Hayes stood there, his face contorted in absolute fury, his fists clenched tight enough to turn his knuckles white. "What have you done?" Bradley's voice was a venomous whisper that carried across the silent room. He didn't care about the blood dripping from Clara's palms. He only saw the shattered crystal and the spilled vintage champagne. "I told you," he hissed, stepping closer, his expensive leather shoe narrowly missing Clara's bruised knee. "I told you to stay out of the way, you stupid, fat, worthless creature. Look at this mess. You're a disgrace to this establishment." Clara choked back a sob, her heavy chest heaving. "She tripped me," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "Mr. Hayes, I swear she put her foot out." "Shut your mouth!" Bradley roared, losing his cornerfully cultivated composure. The stress of hosting the mafia had broken him. "Don't you dare blame our esteemed guests for your pathetic clumsiness. You are fired. Get your massive ass off my floor before I have security drag you out by your hair." Vanessa leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine glass. "Really, Bradley?" she purred, loud enough for the room to hear. "You should have better hiring standards. This isn't a fast food drive-through. It's offensive to make us look at a whale while we're trying to eat." More laughter rippled through the crowd. Clara felt utterly destroyed. She squeezed her eyes shut, wishing the marble floor would simply swallow her whole. The pain in her hands throbbed, but her broken spirit hurt far worse. She prepared to force her aching body up, prepared to walk the walk of shame out of the Lumina room forever. But before Clara could move, the heavy, intricately carved mahogany doors at the far end of the room, the doors leading to the private VIP dining suite, swung open. The laughter died instantly. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet by 10 degrees. Standing in the doorway was Lorenzo Moretti. Lorenzo was a terrifyingly handsome man, tall and broad-shouldered, draped in a custom midnight blue Brioni suit that practically screamed lethal authority. A faint, jagged scar cut through his left eyebrow, a violent contrast to his perfectly sculpted features. He was the undisputed boss of the Moretti Syndicate, a man who could end a life or build an empire with a single nod of his head. Beside him stood his heavily armed enforcer, Vincent Romano, scanning the room with dead eyes. Lorenzo's dark, predatory gaze swept over the dining room. It bypassed the wealthy men, ignored the stunning women, and locked immediately onto the center of the room. It locked onto the puddle of champagne, the broken glass, and the weeping, plus-size waitress kneeling on the floor. A muscle in Lorenzo's jaw feathered. He began to walk. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the slow, deliberate click of Lorenzo's leather shoes against the marble. Bradley Hayes practically vibrated with panic. He rushed forward, bowing his head subserviently. "Mr. Moretti," Bradley babbled, his voice cracking. "I'm so incredibly sorry for this disturbance. This girl is entirely incompetent. She's already been terminated. I will have this mess cleaned up in 30 seconds, I assure you." Lorenzo didn't even look at Bradley. He didn't acknowledge the manager's existence. He walked straight past him, his eyes fixed entirely on Clara. When Lorenzo reached her, he did something that made the collective breath of the entire room hitch in shock. The most dangerous man in Chicago dropped to his knees. He didn't care about the puddle of sticky champagne soaking into his $5,000 trousers. He didn't care about the broken glass. "Clara," Lorenzo said. His voice was a deep, gravelly rumble, surprisingly soft, entirely stripped of the violence he was known for. Clara gasped, finally looking up. Her tear-streaked, flushed face met his dark, intense eyes. She blinked, her mind struggling to process the impossible reality in front of her. "Renzo," she whispered, the old nickname slipping past her lips before she could stop it. 3 years ago, Clara had been working the graveyard shift at a grimy diner on the south side. Taking out the trash one freezing November night, she had stumbled upon a massive, bleeding man collapsed behind the dumpsters. He had been shot twice in the abdomen, left for dead by a rival crew. Anyone else would have run. Anyone else would have minded their own business. But Clara, with her impossibly large heart, had dragged the heavy, bleeding stranger into the back of her rusted Honda. She had hidden him in her tiny apartment for 3 weeks. She had dug the bullets out with tweezers, stitched his flesh, fed him homemade soup, and kept him a secret. He had told her his name was Renzo. He had never mocked her weight. When she awkwardly apologized for taking up too much space on her own sofa, he had looked at her like she was the most beautiful creature God had ever made, telling her she was a goddess of warmth and life. One morning, she woke up and he was gone, leaving behind a stack of $100 bills to cover her rent. She had never seen him again. Until now. Lorenzo reached out, his large, calloused hands gently taking her bleeding palms. He inspected the cuts with a dark scowl before pulling a silk monogrammed handkerchief from his pocket and tenderly wrapping it around her injured hand. "I've been looking for you," Lorenzo murmured, his thumb brushing away a tear from her full cheek. "For 3 years, I've had my men tearing this city apart trying to find my angel." He stood up, refusing to let go of her hand. With gentle, surprising strength, he pulled Clara up with him. He positioned her behind him, shielding her larger frame with his own, making her feel small, safe, and protected for the first time in her life. Lorenzo finally turned to face Bradley Hayes and Vanessa Dupont. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a terrifying, abyssal coldness. The Mafia Boss stared down the trembling manager and the suddenly pale socialite. "Who?" Lorenzo asked, his voice deathly quiet but echoing like thunder in the silent room. "Gave you permission to speak to my queen." The absolute sense that followed Lorenzo's declaration was suffocating. The wealthy patrons of the Lumina Room, usually so insulated by their money and status, were entirely paralyzed by the sheer, unfiltered danger radiating from the man in the center of the room. Clara stood frozen behind Lorenzo's broad back, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The blood from her palms was slowly soaking into his silk handkerchief, but she couldn't feel the pain anymore. She could only feel the solid, unyielding heat of him shielding her from the world's cruelty. Vanessa Dupont's perfectly contoured face drained of all color, leaving her looking hollow and terrified. The malicious amusement that had danced in her eyes just moments before had completely vanished, replaced by the stark realization that she had just crossed a line she could not buy her way back from. "Mr. Moretti," Vanessa stammered, her voice thin and reedy, devoid of its usual aristocratic drawl. "I didn't know. It was just a joke, a silly misunderstanding. She tripped on her own feet. You know how clumsy people can be." Lorenzo didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Vincent," he said softly, not taking his eyes off Vanessa. Vincent Romano stepped forward. He didn't draw a weapon, but the predatory grace of his movements made Vanessa flinch backward, her stiletto heel catching on the carpet. She stumbled, grabbing the edge of the table to keep from falling into the very mess she had caused. "Ms. Dupont," Lorenzo continued, his tone conversational but dripping with lethal intent. "Your family's shipping company, DuPont Logistics. It operates entirely out of the Southside docks, does it not? Docks that my family controls. Docks that require my explicit permission to function." Vanessa swallowed hard, her throat visibly bobbing. "Yes, but—" "As of tonight," Lorenzo interrupted coldly, "DuPont Logistics is banned from the waterfront. Any truck bearing your family's name will be turned away. Any ship attempting to dock will find no hands to unload it. You have 48 hours to liquidate your assets before the company bleeds out entirely. Consider it a lesson in basic manners." Vanessa gasped, covering her mouth with her trembling, manicured hands. He had just erased 3 generations of generational wealth with a single sentence. She burst into tears, her mascara running down her cheeks in ugly black streaks, but no one in the room dared to offer her a shred of sympathy. Lorenzo turned his attention to Bradley Hayes. The restaurant manager was literally shaking, sweat pouring down his forehead, ruining his expensive tailored suit. He looked like a man standing before a firing squad. "Mr. Moretti, please," Bradley begged, clasping his hands together. "I swear on my life I had no idea she was associated with you. I was just trying to maintain the standards of the Lumina Room. You understand business, sir? We cater to the elite. I was only protecting the image of the establishment." "The image," Lorenzo repeated, the word tasting like poison on his tongue. He stepped closer to Bradley, his towering frame casting a long, dark shadow over the cowering manager. "You look at my Clara, a woman who saves lives, a woman with a heart purer than anyone in this superficial wasteland, and you see a liability because she doesn't fit into your pathetic, starved little world. You humiliated her. You put her in danger." Lorenzo reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a sleek, matte black smartphone. He dialed a single number and put it on speaker. The entire dining room listened as the phone rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. "Oakhaven Holdings, how can I assist you, Mr. Moretti?" the voice asked. "Jonathan," Lorenzo said smoothly, his eyes boring into Bradley's terrified face. "The building that houses the Lumina Room. I want it." "Of course, sir. We currently hold the mortgage. I can initiate a hostile buyout of the restaurant's lease immediately. It will take less than 10 minutes to draft the paperwork." "Do it," Lorenzo commanded. "And Jonathan, terminate the lease, effective immediately. Liquidate the assets, donate the kitchen equipment to the Southside Community Kitchen, and gut the dining room. I want this place turned into a parking lot by next month." Bradley let out a strangled, pathetic noise, his knees finally buckling. He collapsed onto the floor, surrounded by the shattered remnants of the champagne glasses. His entire career, his life's work, annihilated in the span of a 3-minute phone call. "You're unemployed, Hayes," Lorenzo sneered, looking down at the broken man. "And if I ever hear that you've been hired at another restaurant in this state, I'll burn that one down too." Lorenzo finally turned back to Clara. The terrifying, cold-blooded mafia boss vanished, replaced instantly by the tender, wounded man she had nursed back to health 3 years ago. He gently cupped her face, his thumbs brushing lightly over her flushed, tear-stained cheeks. "Are you ready to leave, Mia Regina?" he asked softly, his eyes searching hers for permission. Clara looked at the destruction he had wrought in her name. She looked at Vanessa, sobbing uncontrollably at her table, and Bradley, a broken heap on the floor. For years, Clara had made herself small. She had allowed the world to dictate her worth based on the size of her waist. But looking into Lorenzo's eyes, she saw a man who worshipped every single inch of her, a man who would literally tear the city down to its foundations just to see her smile. Clara took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling beneath the damp polyester uniform. She lifted her chin, finding a strength she never knew she possessed. "Yes, Renzo," Clara whispered, her voice steady. "Take me home." He smiled, a devastating, genuine smile that transformed his scarred face. Wrapping a heavy, protective arm around her thick waist, Lorenzo Moretti guided the plus-size waitress out of the Lumina Room, leaving a room full of high society elites entirely speechless in their wake. The crisp autumn air of Chicago hit Clara's face the moment they stepped out of the restaurant, a sharp contrast to the suffocating tension they had just left behind. Waiting at the curb was a massive, custom-built armored Maybach, its engine purring with quiet, lethal power. Vincent moved swiftly ahead, opening the heavy rear door and scanning the dark street with practiced paranoia. Lorenzo guided Clara into the plush leather interior before sliding in beside her. The doors closed with a heavy, vacuum-sealed thud, cutting off the noise of the city completely. The privacy partition between them and the driver was already raised. As the Maybach pulled smoothly into the downtown traffic, Lorenzo immediately reached beneath the seat and pulled out a first aid kit. He gently took Clara's hands, unrolling the bloody silk handkerchief. "I'm sorry," Lorenzo murmured, his jaw tight as he carefully cleaned the small shards of glass from her palms with antiseptic wipes. "I should have found you sooner. I shouldn't have let you suffer in that place for another minute." Clara winced as the alcohol stung her cuts, but she didn't pull away. "Why did you leave, Renzo? 3 years ago. I woke up and you were just gone." Lorenzo sighed, meticulously applying bandages to her hands. He looked up, his dark eyes filled with a heavy, haunting guilt. "Because the men who shot me were still looking for me. The Rossi Syndicate. If they had found out that a beautiful, kind-hearted woman had saved my life, they wouldn't have just killed me, Clara. They would have tortured you. They would have used you to break me." He gently kissed the back of her bandaged hand. I had to leave to protect you. I spent the last 3 years dismantling the Rossi family piece by piece. I couldn't come back for you until the streets were entirely safe, until I could offer you the world without bringing a war to your doorstep. Clara felt a tear slip down her cheek. I thought you were just a regular guy who got into a bad fight. I didn't know you were... You. Does it scare you? Lorenzo asked, a rare flicker of vulnerability crossing his face. Knowing what I am? Clara looked at him. She thought about his ruthless destruction of Bradley and Vanessa, and then she looked at the tender way he was holding her injured hands. No, she said honestly. The world has always been cruel to me, Lorenzo. You're the first person who made it stop. He leaned in, his lips brushing against her forehead in a promise of eternal devotion. But the peaceful moment was violently shattered. Without warning, a massive black SUV violently T-boned the Maybach on Lorenzo's side. The sound of crunching metal was deafening. The armored Maybach absorbed the brunt of the impact, shuddering violently but refusing to flip. Clara screamed as she was thrown hard against the leather seats, but Lorenzo was instantly over her, pinning her heavy frame to the floorboards and covering her entirely with his own body. Down! Stay down! Lorenzo roared over the screech of tires. Outside, the pop, pop, pop of automatic gunfire erupted. Bullets sparked against the Maybach's bulletproof glass, spiderwebbing the reinforced windows, but failing to penetrate. Rossi loyalists! Vincent yelled from the front seat, his own weapon drawn as he threw the Maybach into reverse, the massive engine roaring in protest. Dominic Rossi's surviving crew! They must have tracked us from the restaurant, Lorenzo cursed viciously in Italian. He pulled a sleek Glock from his shoulder holster, his eyes completely devoid of the warmth he had just shown Clara. Keep her down, Vincent. Get us out of the kill zone. The Maybach slammed backward, crushing the hood of a parked car to gain clearance. But as Vincent spun the wheel to escape, the passenger side door closest to Clara, the locking mechanism damaged from the structural stress of the crash, was violently wrenched open from the outside. A masked man in tactical gear lunged into the vehicle, a combat knife gleaming in his hand. He bypassed Lorenzo, aiming straight for the woman he knew was the boss's weakness. Lorenzo was pinned by the awkward angle of the ruined door frame, struggling to aim his weapon without hitting Clara. But Clara didn't wait to be saved. The adrenaline from years of carrying heavy trays and enduring silent abuse finally snapped. As the attacker lunged, Clara didn't shrink away. She roared, planting her thick, sturdy legs against the floorboard, and drove her heavy, steel-toed work shoe squarely into the attacker's kneecap with all the force she could muster. The man howled in agony as his knee buckled backward with a sickening crunch. Before he could recover, Clara grabbed the heavy interior handle of the armored Maybach door. Using the full weight of her body, she hauled herself backward, slamming the heavy, reinforced steel door directly onto the attacker's arm. The bone snapped like a dry twig. The man dropped his knife, screaming as he fell back onto the pavement. Instantly, Lorenzo fired twice through the open window, neutralizing the threat. Vincent slammed on the gas, and the Maybach tore away from the chaotic scene, leaving the remnants of the Rossi crew in the dust of the sirens approaching in the distance. The car was eerily silent, save for the roar of the engine. Lorenzo slowly turned to Clara. She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving, staring at the blood on her uniform. That wasn't hers. Lorenzo didn't look angry. He looked entirely, utterly captivated. He reached out, his hand shaking slightly, and cupped the back of her neck, pulling her into a fierce, desperate kiss. It was a kiss that tasted of gun smoke, adrenaline, and pure, unfiltered worship. When he finally pulled away, he rested his forehead against hers, laughing breathlessly. "You," he whispered, his eyes blazing with awe. "You are magnificent." Clara let out a shaky breath, a genuine smile finally breaking through her shock. "I told Bradley I wasn't just a clumsy cow," she joked weakly. Lorenzo's face hardened, though his touch remained soft. "You are the queen of this city now, Clara. No one will ever disrespect you again. By the way, I had my men relocate your mother, Agnes, from that rundown facility this afternoon. She's currently resting in the west wing of my estate in Lake Forest. She has a private medical team waiting." Clara gasped, the last of her emotional walls crumbling. He hadn't just saved her. He had saved the only family she had left. She wrapped her thick arms tightly around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder, finally crying tears of pure relief. She had spent her entire life trying to shrink, trying to be invisible so the world wouldn't mock her size. But in the arms of the most dangerous man in Chicago, Clara realized she didn't need to shrink ever again. She was exactly the right size to rule an empire. Did you cheer when Clara fought back against the ambush and proved she's not just a damsel in distress? We love a strong, plus-size queen who can hold her own beside a mafia king. If Lorenzo and Clara's thrilling romance kept you on the edge of your seat, drop a comment below. Don't forget to smash that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more intense, real-life drama. Ring the bell so you never miss a twist.